Your line is now unmuted.
Community-oriented policing, meth, drugs, and endangered children. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ron.
Good morning, everybody. Let me turn my camera on so you can see who you're looking at. Good morning from Reno, Nevada. It's brisk and cool, but not as bad as our winters have been thus far. I'm really happy to be here this morning, have a chance to talk to you all about a very important issue to all our communities, and that's crime prevention. I'm retired as the Assistant Police Chief in Reno, Nevada, after 35 years in that business. I've had a chance to travel around the world and work with police agencies during that time, as well as across the country, working with Indian communities with Walt Lamar, the head of this company, for the last 10 years. We've done a lot of training in a number of areas, including crime prevention, community-oriented policing, meth labs, drug endangered children, and on and on and on, all those issues, prescription drug abuse, all those issues that plague our communities. I'm the author of a crime prevention manuscript called Hope and Harmony, where in 1990s, 7 communities participated in using community policing and problem solving to eradicate their communities of different crime problems, everything from graffiti to gangs to domestic violence to drunk driving, those kinds of issues. As I said, I've worked around the world with different policing agencies, including the Ukraine, where I'm working today to help to replace all the police in that country, 500,000 police, trying to help them to get out of the grips of the Russians and to move more toward the European Union. And they are learning how to do policing, learning how to do crime prevention, the same way in which we're going to talk about today. So that's me, and I look forward to seeing and chatting with all of you today. So Cindy, is the sound check working fine? Are you able to hear?
It is. I can hear you just fine. I'm the one experiencing the issues, so I apologize to everyone. But you sound great.
Oh, good. Perfect. Oh, well, welcome, everybody. And let's go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about our subject today, crime prevention. Now, we're going to talk about crime prevention in a number of different ways. One is we're going to talk about crime prevention programs. Now, programs are very important. But as you're going to see as we move through, those are only a very small aspect of crime prevention. Now, I'm going to give you and provide for you a lot of resources and sites where you can go and get already produced crime prevention program materials for your community. Everything including cell phone safety, computer predator concerns, things for parents, guides to gangs, all those kinds of things. And the beauty of these prevention materials is that for those of you that are in crime prevention in your community, you could personalize them to your community. And I'll talk a little bit more about them as we get moving along. The other thing I'm going to talk about with you today is crime prevention as a theory, as a practical application using 2 different kinds of approaches. One is called crime prevention through environmental design. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Crime prevention through environmental design has its roots in history. We know from people building during the days where people were trying to protect their fiefdoms, their communities from predators and from enemies. We know that their designs were very much similar, although in a different respects to what we see in the design of communities today. And you can see a pueblo, you could see a moat around a castle, and you can see a castle with very high arching on the left, towers and gun towers to protect themselves. Now, That's how crime prevention, the ideas of crime prevention began without even knowing it was crime prevention, just simply that we needed to protect ourselves from those that are going to do harm to us or from the elements, because we may live in very harsh environments. And so how do we protect ourselves from those things? And we're going to apply these today to make sense of this in a lot of different examples. So next slide, thank you. So here's what is some of the background on what this means. Shaw and McKay were responsible for what was called the Chicago Area Project. The first real look at how do you design communities, buildings and communities, living buildings and communities, and make them less vulnerable to crime and to victimization, and especially to delinquency of juveniles. And so they came up with this idea that if you build high-story buildings in quads, in pods, so to speak, with a common area that has recreation, and in a common area where people will go to meet each other and meet your neighbors, that will help to alter the social fabric. And that is what's called a sense of community, something that you're very familiar with in many tribal communities, because you are built around most tribal communities. You know your neighbors, you know friends and relatives, and you live in a common area. That isn't the case in most other communities. And some of the very large tribal nations, you find that that's not the case either, depending upon the type of housing that they have. So we learned from the Shaw and McKay project that whole idea of social environments is important to being less vulnerable to crime. Now, Oscar Newman took a different approach. And in the 1970s, he talked about a thing called defensible space. And he helped us to understand that the size of the property, how many stories, what entrances the dwellings may share, all matter in terms of crime prevention. And how you arrange these buildings, similar to what Sean McKay learned, in groups, makes a big difference in terms of social contact, and how you meet with your neighbors. If the areas are publicly visible, if you use external or external corridors, the internal are more threatening. We see that in parking garages. We see that in apartment complexes, where they can be very unsafe or very safe, depending upon what the corridors and what the exits, how they are designed. And also landscaping. How is landscaping in the community, and does it either impede or improve people's opportunity to see the front door, to see people coming and going? And that matters. So let's look at an example of this from one tribal community. So here we have a couple of different photographs that help us to understand the works of Sean McKay and what Oscar Newman said in terms of defensible space. Now, in the top photograph, there's a couple of different types of communities that I want you to see and pay attention to. In this upper area, you see a court. Now, what happens in the natural design of a court is that the doors all start to face toward the center of the court. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that if you are sitting in the front of your house with your windows open, you see your neighbors coming and going. Hopefully, you get to know your neighbors. And in that, you learn what kind of cars they drive, what kind of animals they have, who their kids are, what their daily routines, activities are, and what does that mean in terms of crime prevention? It means that during the day, if you see somebody pull up to the house that's not a car that you're familiar with on your court, it may raise your suspicions. You may see some, and in that, if you're close enough with your neighbor, you may even feel a sense of necessity to call your neighbor and say, is this normal? Somebody, just stopped in front of your house and it looks like they've gone to your side gate, because most burglaries are committed at the back of the house, not at the front of the house. And so that sense of community, that getting to know people, can be influenced by simply the simple design of a curved street where the houses start to face each other. So what else do we have here? What we have is open space. And so you see in the lower photograph, you see homes that have no backyard fences yet and may not have, which is a good thing. Or a lot of communities now, my community included, have the rail fences that are 3 rails, and you could see through it, and you could see your neighbors' yards and backyards, and that's very important from what we know about burglary. And you also see in these houses that it's very open in the front with windows, and some of them have porches. Now let's look at the lower photograph, because we're going to talk a lot about later on about opportunity crime. And in this photograph, you see a front porch. Front porches are coming back to design. Let me see if I could get this light off of me there. But back to the design of homes, because it pushes people out to get to know their neighbors and get to know what's happening in the front of their house. And that's generally where the threats start, but the threat ends with entry to the rear. So we're going to come back to this. But let me ask the question, what else do you see in this photograph? And please type into the little message area. What else do you see here that may help for crime prevention? Anything? That maybe you, or what may be missing that you think would be helpful? Yes, very good. The light on the grass. Thank you, Marco. We're going to talk about lighting as well. It's amazing how lighting affects fencing, whether or not there's fencing, and whether fencing is going to be an inhibitor or maybe more positive force. And that depends on the type of fencing, right? Anything else? All right, well, let's move forward and look and talk about some other issues. People coming and going all around. Yes, very good. Is it very good, Kathy? And that's true. The more people you have in your neighborhood coming and going, the busier it is with your neighbors, and that the less vulnerable your community may be. And there's a lot of things that can be done to enhance that these days, both with technology and both with people's natural purpose in being out in the community. Say a group of ladies or children play out front during the day, or walk out front during the day, or men, depending upon how people's shifts are, and that they're always out walking around in their neighborhood, taking a walk in the morning, jogging in the morning, and that you learn to know a lot about your neighbors based on that. Most of it is very positive. Some of it you may not want to learn when the trash comes out and things like that, but we learn a lot about our neighbors. Now, I want to approach an issue and get it out of the way before we start, so you don't think that crime prevention programs are negative, because as I said, they're not. You can see the 2 gentlemen from South Stafford, England, standing in front of a crime prevention booth. And many of you can relate to police athletic league programs or neighborhood watch programs as being prominent in U.S. crime prevention. But they aren't all positive depending upon the way in which they're implemented. Some of the larger programs, and we'll talk about that later on, but I want to show you this website. Can I do this, Cindy? Will they be able to see?
I don't think you can click on that from here. It's not hyperlinked.
It won't. Okay.
But we'll include it in the after action report if that is okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
If you click on this website, this is the National Crime Prevention Council. And the National Crime Prevention Council has a similar array of programs, everything crime prevention programs available for free. And so if you are interested, and I have one example I'm going to be showing you here in just a minute, but if you are interested, for example, in a parent's guide to identifying your children in gangs. It provides that. If you are concerned about prescription drug abuse, it provides you information about that and how you can target harden your own family against other family members or friends or relatives or neighbors, using or having access to your prescription drugs. Because those are the people that definitely, prescription drug is an issue that, first of all, it's a family issue. Most drugs come from inside the family. Secondly, from relatives, and third, from friends and neighbors. And so it has that kind of information. If you're worried about cell phone dangers for your children or cyber computer dangers for your children, it has brochures on that. Now, the nice thing about it is that these brochures are produced in a way that it has a block on the bottom that you can include your community's logo and information. So if you are here in this conference and you're looking at, and you are part of the police department or part of another community agency that hands out crime prevention material, you can reproduce these for free. They're public domain documents. You can put your logo on them, and you can put all these crime prevention materials out in your community and public places, libraries, schools, other places where people may come, in the clinic where people may come and want this type of information. So it's a really good resource for communities for crime prevention, and provides a lot to parents and everybody to help learn and understand what crime prevention is all about. And here's one of the guides that that is a very popular guide that you could see that's provided and is available, called Identity Theft. And right here on the side, you can see it says what to do if you are a victim. Now, these guides are typically open up threefold. And so on the other side of this guide is all kinds of information about identity theft, how to protect your computer, what to be careful of in terms of your credit cards, and all these kinds of things. So this is just one of the 300 or more crime prevention materials that we will make available to you on Lamar and Associates website, and also provided through that NCPC little guidance there. So there's two theories of crime that we're going to talk about. And you would think that, oh man, come on, Ron, you're going to talk about theories. I know you're a professor at school, but please, you're killing me. I'm going to talk about theories that are applied. Applied theories mean these are action theories. This means that these matter in terms of our understanding and prevention of crime. The first is routine activities theory, and it's real simple. And I'm going to give you a criminology class in about 2 minutes. Routine activities theory says this: when a likely offender, a suitable target come together in space and time, absent a capable guardian, a crime may occur. Well, what the heck does that mean? It means simply this. Look, if offenders are motivated and they steal based on simple opportunities, if an offender and a suitable target, you as a person, or your unlocked car, or your house, or your business, come together at a location, which is space and time, if those three things are evident, then bad things can happen. So what's a capable guardian? We'll talk about that later on, but capable guardians are those things, people, signs that may help you to prevent crime from occurring. So the simple thing is, how do you prevent crime? By removing one or two of those factors. Make it more difficult for the offender, make it less profitable or available as a target, and to make sure that there are guardians available. Whether it's crime prevention materials I talked to you about as a guardian. If you learn about identity theft and you take some of those steps to prevent yourself from being a victim, you've not only impacted the guardianship, but you've also impacted yourself as a vulnerable victim and made yourself less attractive by an offender. Simple things. So what's rational choice theory? A lot of people think that criminals are bright, that are smart, that, gosh, they're able to use computers today to do all kinds of crazy things. My 1-year-old granddaughter can get on my cell phone if it's sitting down, and she knows how to push the button, hit the photo icon, and flip slides at 1 year old. It doesn't take a genius to know how to steal things. Most offenders are lazy, and most offenders simply look for easy opportunities. So there's two theories here. It's real simple. One is that offenders offend willingly in almost all cases. And they simply look and they make quick decisions. And they simply look at risk versus reward, pain versus pleasure. And so what does that mean? It means that if they're walking down the street and they see your car door unlocked, they're going to make a quick decision. Should I walk up your driveway and click the knob and see if the door is open and if there's anything inside and take it? Or is this a neighborhood that has poor locks because I know about locks, and so it'd be easy to go around the back door, I never see anybody in this neighborhood, and either break a window to get in or maybe look for the windows to be unlocked? That's how most crimes occur that involve loss of property. And now people crimes are a little bit different, but that's loss of property. What we also know about crime is that there's this idea that if you don't attend to your neighborhood, if you don't attend to your residents, that it becomes, in the minds of offenders, a good vulnerable target. Now, in a urban sense, like in a big city or in a big community where there's a downtown, it matters critically to businesses. And that's called broken windows theory. And it simply means this: if you don't take care of your property and show ownership, if your property is a mess with yard cars, with poor lighting, with overgrown trees and things, you make yourself vulnerable to victimization. Your whole neighborhood. And one house on the neighborhood could impact the rest of the neighborhood. So it's important that we understand that how crime occurs. So look at this photograph and tell me, you've got gang graffiti, we've got from the native mob, we've got bullet holes in a road sign, which is common in many communities, especially communities that are rural, like my communities in Nevada, Reno, Nevada. If you go out, you see these, every hunter in the world wants to shoot a sign on the way to hunting. But what does this mean in terms of ownership, in terms of community crime prevention? So let me ask you, what are your communities doing? Let's just talk about one, because we're going to be doing one of these webinars on gangs next or in a few months. What are your communities doing to deal just with graffiti? Can somebody share with us? Because graffiti is important. Graffiti is about building fences with paint, as I call it. It's about territoriality. It's about imposing yourself with fences on a community and saying, if you are of one of us, you're allowed in. If you are not, you should be threatened by this graffiti. And it tells people inside the graffiti fences that we own and control this area. And so you have to mind us. And whether we're selling drugs, whether we're stealing from you, whatever that may be. So are there any examples? If not, we'll talk about some as we move forward. Okay. Well, let's talk about crime prevention and community policing as being compatible. Now, community policing simply means the community part is more prominent than the policing part. It's a terminology that came about through police in the 1980s, and it simply means this: the communities are healthier if they work together to deal with issues, crime issues. Not only the immediate crime issues, but the physical conditions, the physical and social issues of crime related to crime, the underlying causes of crime problems. In my community in Reno, Nevada, we have a downtown that has a lot of homeless, about 300 homeless people. And they migrate to Reno because of the casinos, because there's a lot of free food, There's a lot of free drink, and there's a lot of street opportunities for panhandling and other things. But it also makes them very vulnerable to victimization. Offenders of street crime are also highly victimized in street crime. It's a vicious cycle. So one of the problems we had, especially with panhandling and violent crime, was related to people getting drunk and sleeping in the parks in the downtown area. When we looked at the problem, initially, police would just scoop up the people that were drunk, take them to county jail, they would sober up, they'd come back, and they'd end up in the same place the next day. And it was a vicious cycle. But if you look at the underlying causes, one is their addiction. What can we do to get other public-private organizations involved in their addiction? So we reached out to them and got them engaged and out patrolling and finding people and offering assistance. But what could we do about the alcohol consumption? Well, we found that most alcohol was purchased in the little stores around the park area, and they were in small bottles and also sold very, very cheap wine and alcohol. We went to the business owners who were complaining about all the crimes that they were having related to alcohol addiction, and told them this is what the problem is. And they came to their own conclusion that we need to get rid of the small little, as I call, airplane bottles of liquor and the very cheap liquor in an effort to reduce the underlying factors involved in crime. We were able to, as a result of that, get people to places that would help them off their addiction, to places that would help give them shelter downtown that they didn't know about or did know about, but because they were drunk, they weren't allowed in. And also to reduce the number of the violence significantly, because we had less people drunk downtown that were fighting and stealing from each other, and all the vicious cycle of what all that means. And so that's how these things all work together. So let's talk a little bit about now that we've talked about the theories and idea, about one of these specific aspects of crime prevention called crime prevention through environmental design. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the things that you do in your neighborhood, the things that you do with your business matter critically in your vulnerability to crime. And there's three areas I'm going to talk about today: access control, natural surveillance, and territorial reinforcement. So what's access control? Well, it could be a fence. Now, anybody could jump over that fence, can't they? So it doesn't look like it's that big a deal. However, what else is going on in this apartment complex is difficult to see. Is what you see there is a car. What that means is that these two apartment complexes face each other, and there's lighting, and there's windows on the front, and the backyards are open so they can see each other backyard to backyard. Those are all access control issues, and they are natural surveillance or observation issues. We also oftentimes see controlled access at places, whether it's gate, whether it's somebody who sits at a desk that checks an ID. It may be a key card ID for getting into a parking garage or something of that nature. But let me tell you this, also on access control. Visibility. So what you see here, there's a couple things here. This is a business visibility. And what you see here is a couple of things that matter very, very importantly. One is that you have people that are walking, so their natural recreation is going past this business. So these are eyes and ears on the business. What you see is the trees in front of the business, trimmed to about 10 feet, the canopy as they call it. This gives clear visibility, as does a road to this business. Now there's a lot more that matters in terms of this business. What is the lighting? Is it overhead lighting that sits up above the trees and casts a shadow? Or is it lower lighting that casts light through the visibility zone and lightens up everything? And that matters tremendously. So those are some ideas on how you improve visibility. Here's a before and after for a couple of places. Now you see here, you see the bushes that block the access. Here's a person walking. And here below, you see the bushes trimmed away from the opening and trimmed away a little bit here so that people can see. And also, if there's a light here in the evening, it won't block people from the light. Here you have an apartment building that has a controlled access, number one, right? And then also a whole cleaned up area for the trees so that you have access lighting for the rear of the places. So these are all, again, good examples of what we call, let me go back to access control. And let me add one other thing for residences. And let me give this example. When you drive through neighborhoods of places, you oftentimes see in the neighborhoods little shrubberies. Well, if you're talking about single family homes and somebody's putting, and let me go to a single family home. Here we go. And if somebody builds in this house, for example, if they build a little garden right around the front of this house, that house will be less vulnerable to burglars than if you didn't. Now that sounds strange, doesn't it? And you're going, Ron's telling me that if we put a little rock garden at the front of our house, it'll be less vulnerable. Yes, because here's the mindset, is that the way we are wired as human beings, we assess threats based on a lot of different things. And we have found that in the research that people who have a well-maintained lawn and a little barrier, whether it is a little barrier fence or little bushes or a garden around the front of the house, people that a garden vent, I mean one that is by the driveway in the house or the sidewalk and trimmed around the house, people are less vulnerable, less likely to step over that to go to your house. The reason being is that compared to the other homes in the neighborhood, there's a belief in our minds that if the person takes this care and establishes this ownership, that house may be harder to penetrate than a house next door. It's funny. It's just the way that we are wired as human beings and the way that we think about these things. And when I first heard the research, I said, that's ludicrous. And then I started looking at homes and neighborhoods as I was driving patrol, and those homes that had the little short fences around them, the little gardens around the outside edges of the house, and started noticing the burglary calls that I was taking. And very few of those were burglary calls as compared to other homes in the neighborhood. Now, this is an example of natural surveillance. The second area of SEPTED that I want to talk about. What natural surveillance is windows, lighting, and landscaping again. So you see here, low landscaping, so good lines of eyesight, of vision. You see that from all three stories of the house, you can see the car, except for what's blocked by that tree, but the tree has a 10-foot canopy. And you see lighting that is lower than a lot of lighting you see in neighborhoods. Most neighborhoods and most shopping centers have this overhead lighting that is very high, that does nothing more than to cast shadows. So if you go to a supermarket and you see this overhead, what they call cobra lighting, it casts shadows out between the cars and makes people less safe and more vulnerable to people doing things to them and hiding from them and that. Whereas in more modern construction, you see this lower lighting that is about 6 to 8 feet high that bounces light off cement and removes shadows, or cast light directly under canopies and remove shadows, which makes it less vulnerable. So let me show you these two photos. This is the picture in the upper left-hand corner is of a clinic in a tribal community. What do you see in the lighting there based on what we talked about, natural surveillance? And this is Oklahoma City. What do you see in terms of possible vulnerability or crime prevention for that clinic. Now, this is a new building. Good. Front lights about 3 feet tall. Excellent. And these types of lights, as you see, produce, looking around those little lights and also up in the lights along the walkway, they cast lights right at people's hip and cast lights out. Look at that driveway that is out there. Even from those little lights, there are no shadows. If you were to go to that clinic at 10 o'clock at night, you'd feel perfectly safe in most cases walking out the front of that building and out to your vehicle, because you're going to be able to see between all the cars, and the vegetation is low. What else do you see for the front of the building? In terms of natural surveillance. Open windows, yes, very good, Marco. And so whether people are walking in and out of the fronts of the windows, yes, very good, Cindy. Whether they are on the second floor or the first floor, and you could see people sitting at their desks who are looking outside, and that is natural surveillance. We have the same thing for our home. Now, I don't want people looking inside my windows at night while I'm watching TV, but I do want people to be able to see my front door. And I do want them to be able to see the windows on my house not blocked by trees and bushes, because I want nobody to be able to come between the bushes and the windows and Jimmy open the window to get into my house, or stand there at the front door and work breaking the lock or something like that. So that's the natural surveillance that we want, people driving by and walking by. Now, what do you see in the bottom photograph? What natural surveillance issues do you see for this convenience store? No lighting outside. The windows are covered with signs. Good. Posters blocking all the views. And isn't this what we typically see? Advertisement, advertisement, advertisement on convenience stores. And the clerk's is probably located right outside the front door, which makes it easy to go in and out. Now, studies were done of robberies of convenience stores, and what those studies found real clearly was that, look, there are ways in which we can make these places more or less vulnerable, and you will make it more vulnerable if you put these posters all on the front of the building, if your clerk is located right next to the door, and if your shelves run perpendicular to the door instead of this way, coming into the door. Now, why would you want them this way? Well, when the windows are open, anybody pulling up can see down the aisles, all the way to the milk and the beer coolers in the back. Does that matter for natural surveillance? Sure it does. And so if you put the clerks in the middle, or of the first aisles, center on the door, the clerks can see everybody coming in and can also see anybody in the back aisles if the counters are low, and you should lower those counters so that you can see the beer coolers and that. And so all these things matter in terms of and also having 2 clerks on duty, especially in the evenings. And the last thing is, if you want to prevent yourself against robbery, the one thing that you can do more so than any of what we talked about, and including cameras, is a greeting policy. How weird is that? When talking to robbers, they say that on average they go to 5 or 7 different places to make a determination what's going to be their target. On a lot of factors we talked about. But what was the number one factor that they determined was that whether or not the person talked to them or greeted them. Now, why would that matter? Well, let's go back to human nature again. When people talk to us, say something to us, they establish personal contact. When that personal contact is made, we feel 2 things. We feel a connection whether that connection is threatening or positive. And in the case of somebody doing something illegal, it's negative because we feel, oh no, that person can identify me. Well, the funny thing is that the same robbers who say that a greeting policy impacted them the most didn't wear a mask. So they would have been identified anyway. But they still felt that connection made them more vulnerable. So if you own a business, the best thing that you can do is a greeting policy. Think about the greeter, the old grumpy Marine, like I was formerly in the Marine Corps, the old grumpy Marine that is sitting at the door saying, welcome to Walmart, get your stuff and get out. Well, the only reason why they have greeters in that store is not to employ older people, not to employ grumpy old Marines. It's because they know from retail research that a greeting policy reduces a person's tendency to steal from the store. That connection and that connection alone. So again, we learn a lot about things that can help us prevent crime that have nothing to do with policing, has nothing to do with law enforcement. It has simply to do with design and what we know about offending based on two theories of crime: routine activities and rational choice theories. Now let's look at this house. This house is in Lumbee Tribal Housing in North Carolina. Now, what do you think is the part of this house that makes it the least vulnerable to victimization? What do you see there that you don't see on a lot of homes that actually is coming back now? It says a lot about our lives today as well, our busy lives, and what has happened to the design of homes that have made our lives more complicated and more risky in some cases. A porch and a garage. Very good, Cindy, and very good, Kathy. Thank you. So here's what happens. In our worlds today, those of us that have single-family homes, here's the typical drill that I hear when we do these trainings and I talk to people and say, tell me about your routine activities. Well, I get up in the morning, I showered within these minutes, I grab my coffee, I run out to my car, I hit the garage door opener, I drive out, I put the garage door opener down, I go to work. I come home, I hit the garage door opener, I hit the garage door opener and close it, a closer, I go in the house. If it's a nice day, we go out in the backyard and barbecue. No activity in the front of the house. Do you know your neighbors? Well, kinda. And that's the way it is today. We're so busy, and we've moved from the 1950s when everything was at the front of the house to everything at the rear of the house, and we never see our neighbors. So porches push us to the front of the house and help to establish that sense of community, that sense of getting to know who your neighbors are and what they are all about and what the risks are in your neighborhood, and makes you more likely when you know them to call them and heed a warning if something looks out of place, or to call the police and say, look, I know my neighbor, they're on vacation, somebody's in front of their house and has gone around to the rear of the house, you should come over and check. And so that's what we see in the newer designs. These are 3 self-initiated CPTED evaluation forms that I wanted to share with you. Now, if you have a business, if you live in an apartment, or if you live in a single-family home, you can click on these sites and it will print a self-evaluation form for crime prevention through environmental design for you. So if you have a business, this form will help you to look at your business and learn what things you can do to target harden your business. Oh, thank you, Sandra. So it was my children that met our neighbors first, maybe unsafe, but they wanted to find other kids to play with. and did so without me. Absolutely. You know, and you make a good point, Sandra, because my son was a neighborhood ambassador when he was young. He would just walk into a garage and start saying hi to people who became some of our best friends in the neighborhood, and also based on our neighbors, based on our kids going to school. And so you go to a school event, you know, kids are playing soccer, kids are in the Boys and Girls Club together, which my kids were, and they played basketball in the Boys and Girls Club and ate lunches there. And so it was a great place to meet your neighbor through your kids. So you're absolutely right. And so for those of you that want to download these, you'll find them very helpful and ways in which you can make your house less vulnerable using the SEPTED principles that we talked about. All right, so let's talk about something that a good friend of mine, Greg Seville, coined, and that is second generation SEPTED. So we've talked about how to make your homes, how to make your properties more safe based on design. But we cannot ignore the strength and the importance of family structures, of neighborhood structures. And what Greg Seville coined in second generation SEPTED, and he is the president of the International SEPTED Association, was what really counts is a sense of community that we've already talked about. And what he says is that the most vulnerable aspect of a safe community lies not in the structures, brick and mortar, as much as family. The thought and most important of behavior. So what do we expect of our neighbors in terms of a safe community? What are we willing to do as individuals for our neighbors? What do we expect of our children in terms of their behavior in the neighborhood? Vandalism, fighting, things of that nature that make for a more cohesive or less cohesive neighborhood. And as Walt Lamar, the president of this company, would always say when we were doing these trainings together, that this instinctually, this is in the DNA of tribal communities. This is the tribal way. And that's what Walt would say, that this is how we live in communities of closeness. Whereas many communities outside of tribal communities do not have that luxury unless you happen to live in a city and in a community that is maybe one that is based around your ethnic background or your culture or your religion. And so people live together in clusters in a community where you have that sense developed based on your heritage, whereas most communities do not. So tribal communities, this makes sense when we do the training and is oftentimes said to be, is an easy thing to help people to understand and to improve upon. So that's SEPTED. Let's talk about situational crime prevention, the opportunity crimes. Now, I told you earlier that reducing opportunities and increasing risk helps us to reduce crime, and that opportunities account for a high percentage of crime. Up to 70% of crimes committed are simply opportunities. They're thefts, they're low-level assaults, there's and those things. So let's look at what this means. And there's 5 areas that I want to talk about to finish up today. One is increasing the effort. Well, a good example of that is the new key cards on credit cards or photos on your credit cards. Before we receive credit cards, we have to stick a key in there. There were photos. Some banks, like Bank of America, would allow your photo to be on the credit card. It took forever to get the card companies to put a photo on a credit card. Why? Because they didn't care about theft up to $500 or $250 because they were insured, and they will do anything possible to get you to use their credit card instead of somebody else's. So if you don't have to go get a picture on your credit card, a lot of people will use that credit card just for the convenience. A camera in a store will increase the risk. So will a photo on a credit card. So you can already see that some of these things, there's more than one benefit. Reduce the rewards. Inscribing information on electronics will help to reduce rewards. Reducing provocations. Why are there fights at this bar all the time? Why are there fights at this soccer game all the time? Well, in my community, the reason why is that a lot of our soccer games on the weekends were played in parks where a lot of immigrants from South America came to play soccer. And in those communities, there were rival gangs, South American gangs, and young Hispanic gangs. And we found that unless you worked with these communities on getting them separated in a way, they ended up antagonizing each other. And when it came to the point where a 12-year-old girl was shot in the head at a soccer game, it became a community crisis and we had to do something. And so understanding your communities and provocations and how you can reduce those things is important. Understanding why is it that this bar always has fights and stabbings. It could be alcohol service issues. It could be underage drinking issues. It could be a lot of other things where the bartender and management could help to control. We know that from research. What are other ways? Simply removing excuses, putting no trespassing, no parking here, nobody allowed in the, no guns allowed, even in a community even in a state that allows for concealed weapons. And so these things matter. So let's look at some of these in a little more detail. Situational crime prevention. So here's some of the things that are done to make it more difficult. If you go to libraries nowadays, if you go to a lot of public places, if you go to some bars, we have a bar in town called Bullies. It's a sports bar, and you sit at big tables and you sit up at a higher like bar stools, these big tables, and they have hooks underneath the tables so that ladies can put their purses or students can put their knapsacks. That way they aren't on the ground or hanging on the backs of their tables. It matters for crime prevention. It certainly matters in libraries because every kid coming to a library has a computer and a backpack, and they get stolen off the backs of people's chairs all the time. You look at the shopping carts these days. Many shopping carts now have a hook in the front, a little hook device in the front of the cart to where people can put their purses or knapsacks, and you can't just grab it and pull it up. You see the credit cards with the little card on it embedded in it. You see warning CCTV camera signs. You see clubs for steering wheels. You see the RHID protective little wallets. You see the double locking door for front door entrances. Lots and lots and lots of things that we can make it that apply to CPTED principles. It's all about design. So what is situational crime prevention's role? Basically, highly specific. It could be car theft and joyriding, and understanding that there are different opportunities here. Car theft, you're preventing a person from using a car. Joyriding is an issue with parents, and an issue with parents making sure cars aren't readily available to younger kids while they may be away for the weekend. Or it may also be not making your car vulnerable to people just riding by and having an opportunity to drive your car to school because it's a long way. It happens all the time in Reno, Nevada. We are a community of 4 seasons. In the wintertime, people like starting their car in their driveway on a snowy day, melting off the snow while they are inside getting the kids ready and getting their cup of coffee. Then they go out and they see their cars gone. Why? Because kids going to school decide, hey, I'd rather hop in this car and drive it a couple blocks from school and drop it off at high school than to walk to school today. It's cold, it's windy, and so that's what I'm going to do. Now, so what are the fixes to that? Well, a lot of car companies now allow for you to start your car remotely and to keep your car locked. My son has that because he has his truck parked out in front of his house all the time. So people can't get into the car because it's locked, but the car runs and gets his car warm. Knowing about everyday movements of people helps to prevent crime. What are your routine activities? Do you leave the house every day at certain times for a walk? Do you leave every certain day to go do something else? Do you go at night to certain meetings or places where it is dark and it's not safe walking and you feel uncomfortable? Situational crime prevention helps us for understanding that one crime opportunity may encourage another. We know that burglars often reoffend. Well, they may break into your house, find a bunch of things, but too much to take, so they come back. Or they might tell a friend that, hey, in this neighborhood, these houses are easy to get into. The windows are really crummy, and they're easy to just jimmy open with a screwdriver. You don't need to even break the window. And so they tell their friends, and so their friends go to that community and start breaking into the homes because of the construction and design of the homes. Some products are more tempting, like electronics. Electronics, the smallest of electronics, are very expensive these days. They aren't like when I grew up, the old VCRs that were the size of a Volkswagen. And some of you that are my age remember those days. So what's stolen in communities? What is taken mostly by people? Well, here it's called crave. It's understanding what people crave. Things that are concealable, that are easily hidden in pockets or bags. It are things that are easily removable. A bike, cigarettes, alcohol, medicine, beauty products. It's things that are readily available. Small electronics, jewelry. Things that are valuable, a cell phone, an iPad, iPods, Fitbits now. Other electronics, DVDs, not tobacco, liquor, microwaves, or tobacco, I'm sorry, liquor and microwaves, especially microwaves and things from new construction. New construction is a huge area of theft. First of all, depending upon the cycle of construction, the subcontractors can work against each other. If the people coming in to put in the electronics, the stoves, the microwave and all of that aren't the last and lock up the place, if electrical still has to come in, then it leaves those areas open for theft at night. And I've seen places in my community where 20 or 30 homes, microwaves and stoves and that were missing over a weekend. They didn't have security. And they were open because other subcontractors still needed access to the building and didn't lock it up. And we also know that even in the wiring, that if you wire the house and don't sheetrock the walls real quickly, the people are going to come in and steal the copper wiring. And then they're going to steal the copper wiring around the coils for the air conditioners and other things. And so these things are all things that fall into that area of crave. So let me ask you, in your community, what are the things that are stolen the most in your community and by who? What kind of theft problem, what things are craved in your community that your community is struggling to deal with? That maybe now that you've learned about CPTED and situational crime prevention, you may be able to have some ideas on how to help prevent these things from occurring. Well, I'll tell you, as people are looking to write, I think I see a couple of people writing, is that for kids, for girls especially, it's beauty products. Girls will steal makeup. Boys, they're going to steal electronics, and so it's those type and cigarettes. And so it's those types of things, and alcohol, that you need to look at how can we prevent against them. And so this is, and I've given you the website for this. This puts situational crime prevention and crime prevention the crime prevention through environmental design into one chart and give you some ideas. So if you're thinking about your residence, your property, your neighborhoods, whether it's a park or whatever, and there are problems, this gives you an opportunity to understand how you can help to remove those problems. So let's look at this. Let's say that that you're looking at making things more difficult for increasing the risks of burglary. And so you're looking at extending it a number of different things underneath there. Improving street lighting, support whistleblowers, which means basically your neighbors, take routine precautions, to neighborhood watch, to a number of different issues. So you can use this as an opportunity to help you to understand how to do all these things, how to avoid disputes, how to post instructions, no parking, private property, how to avoid people coming together. I mean, in my high school, when I was a kid, our rivalries, basically the high school divided the field in half and had parking for teams, rival teams, and parking for our teams. And the snack bar was divided in half so that half of the stadium could come to one side of the snack bar and others to the other side. And that kept parents and kids who were watching the games from fighting and taunting each other and causing problems that led to problems after the game. And so there's a lot of opportunities to do those things to make, as I said, these communities safer. There's another thing I want to talk about before I get into an example for you of all of what we talked about in process. There was research that was done for the first time in the United States on crime prevention programs. In 1997, the University of Maryland looked at 300 most prominent crime prevention programs. And the results of their study shocked the policing field and created major debates because a lot of what we believed was working wasn't, or a lot of what we thought didn't hold promise does. And so let's look at just a few of these. And this is available through Walt Lamar and Associates, in crime prevention, and you can look at it yourself. I'm going to talk about a few of them. Does it mean that the ones that don't work aren't working? No, they are working under certain conditions. So let's look at what does work. Parenting for juvenile delinquents, parenting training for juvenile delinquents. Kids are tough to raise. Kids are really tough to control. And so there's lots of information out there from the National Juvenile Justice Foundation and a number of other places that help us to understand how we can parent and help instill in juveniles more positive, more productive behaviors. Vocational training for ex-cons, important. There's a lot of people focus on education training for cons in school, that you need an education to get a job. That's changing now. A lot of people say the education isn't as important as vocational training. The reality is that ex-convicts are going to probably be able to compete and get better jobs with vocational training, learning to be a welder, learning to be a sheetrocker, learning to be this, that, than they are getting a high school or college education. Not that they are both possibly important, but if you're talking about 4 years of education compared to a 1 year or 6 month or a 3 month certification for a job that they can get right out of prison or jail, what is most important? The most important thing is get them working, get them to be self-reliant. And then if they want to get an education and move on, that's fine. So things are changing. Nuisance abatement on drug houses. There's a lot of problems on vacant homes. And those of you that live in California and other places, it's sad. It's sad that California has an occupancy law that says that if you own a rental property in California, and it happens with some of my friends in Nevada who moved here from California and have a rental property, all of a sudden you're in between rentals and you go down and you find out that you've got squatters on your property. It is nearly impossible and costs thousands of dollars to have those people removed in states like California, even though they are illegally there, maybe damaging your property, and have squatted and used it as their own property. So the idea is that whatever you can do to abate properties that are just abandoned, or to target harden your properties in between rentals, and that helps to keep that property from being a blight and a focus of drug business. One of my friends had a property down in a small house in a community where a lot of people rented in California, and a lot of them were empty, very small residences during the off season. When they went down there, they found that from their rental property to the rental property next door, that the people were using the electricity of the neighbors for his house, and they were cooking methamphetamine. They had a meth lab in the place. They still couldn't get rid of them because the police couldn't get there at a time that they were cooking meth. They just kept removing the lab, and then they come in and build another one and another one. It was just a mess. And so you can see that these things mean something in terms of a lot of what we discussed, especially, broken windows theory. Special police units for monitoring high-risk offenders is important. We know that the highest risk offenders will continue to offend based on research. We know that 10% of high-risk offenders, career criminals as we call them, are responsible up to 80-90% of certain types of crimes, like burglary, like fraud, like identity theft. And so the point here is that if you can go after the high-risk offenders, you'll have an impact on crime by removing the numbers of crimes that they're responsible for, that very high percentage. Having police work the areas that are the biggest problems makes sense. Why should police randomly drive throughout your neighborhood in areas where there aren't problems? They should be spending all their time where you feel there are problems or safety risks. That means that they need to understand where crimes are occurring, and they need to be responsibly deploying people to the places in the neighborhoods that you're concerned about. What doesn't work? Here's the one that's going to raise a lot of consternation. Community policing against crime in high poverty areas. Community mobilization. The first thing people want to say is that when you've got a poverty area, send police in there to make friends and to improve trust. Well, people aren't there yet. You've got to help the community to be self-sufficient first. It's not about relations. It's about making a community capable and amenable to making it better. And so you have to work on what their basic needs are. The basic needs in a poverty area community are jobs or safety. Once you do that, you can move to mobilization and get people to think about doing other things together to make the community safer. But until they've got a sustainable income, until they've got they feel they can raise their family and fend for their family, they aren't going to be willing to get together to do other things. They're suffering. And so that has to be the first priority, as we know. Peer counseling for students in school. There's a lot of problems with peer counseling depending upon how peer counseling is organized. Peer counseling can be very positive and it can be very negative. If peer counseling is overseen, and it's a positive thing where students get help, that's good. If peer counseling is negative in what they're doing, just identifying students with problems or causing problems and making it very negative, now you've got a negative issue. And kids who feel that those students that were punished should have been punished will also turn against the peer counselors saying, well, they shouldn't have done that. That was awfully harsh. And it's just the reality. So you have to be careful about that. Dare America is not a public corporation. It's private. It's a private company that sells DARE materials. And for years, there was criticism that DARE needed to have a curriculum change. And they needed to have DARE for middle school and DARE for high school, because they found that what they taught kids in grammar school did not resonate and stay with them through middle school and high school. So there are new curriculums out that have fixed that. Boot camps don't work with juveniles or adults. They work with juveniles only if they are followed up with parents at home. They work when kids are in the boot camp because you're forcing them to do certain things. But the behaviors are trying to instill in them to be self-regulating, to not portray poor behaviors, just doesn't stick with them in the long term. And the last I want to talk about was Neighborhood Watch. Neighborhood Watch is great when it's run by neighborhoods. If Neighborhood Watch is simply the police coming in saying, hi, we're the police, we're going to do a presentation and we'll come talk to you every month and see how you're doing, you haven't organized your Neighborhood Watch. The police have. It works when the neighborhood comes to the police and says, we want Neighborhood Watch. We are going to select the Neighborhood Watch captain, and we're going to have monthly meetings, and we're going to maintain those monthly meetings, and then it works very well. The problem is that in many neighborhoods, that the neighborhood captain, who's highly motivated, has other conflicts, and so there's not a replacement, and there's not the continuous meeting. So all you have in the end is a sign. Now the sign may help in some respects, but if the kids find out in the neighborhood that they live that there is no Neighborhood Watch going on, then kids are going to know, they're going to tell their friends, and many burglaries that occur in neighborhoods are from kids in the neighborhood. So the types of burglaries you're going to have is money missing, you're going to have electronics missing and things of that nature, not the bigger things. Not the jewelry, not the things that take time to find and to get into necessarily, unless it's readily available. And so it doesn't say that these things don't work. They don't work in the manner in which many police departments and communities have implemented that, and there are some changes. All right, we have 15 minutes left. I'm going to talk about what's promising real quickly and give you a real quick example. And then we're going to leave some time for discussion. So what's promising? Proactive drunk driving with breath testing is promising. A lot of bars have breath testing now. And a lot of people have those breath test devices. They're very cheap and they're readily available. And that's positive. Community policing with priority-driven meetings. Meetings with police work if there is an agenda. Meetings with police don't work if it's simply kumbaya. If that makes sense. Police go to a community, they should know what the needs are, and they should have a meeting based on what people are worried about. And then it becomes successful. Target hardening, that CEPTED that we talked about. Drug courts, many Indian communities have drug courts. They're very promising. We're the best prevention for methamphetamine for a lot of different reasons. 2 clerks at convenience store, we talked about that. Community-based after-school programs, or if your community has a Boys and Girls Club that has after-school programs. All these things are very promising and show promise. Now, let me just finish with that report is available for you and gives you a good idea of all the types of prevention programs that are out there and what works. Let me give you a real quick example of putting a lot of these CEPTED and target hardening ideas together. This is Central Middle School, a case study. In Brampton, Ontario, Canada, there are 2,000 students in that school. 25% of them were they had trespassers every day that nobody dealt with. Just these people could come to school. The trespassers hung out at the basketball courts, and they had 62 incidents of thefts, weapons, robberies of the kids, assaults. The school had a very unsafe reputation. So here's a diagram of the school, and you can see where the star's at, and then to the left, the B, where buses parked and people parked, and you see that they could come and drive right in back to the tennis courts and hang out there and cause lots of problems. Also, this school is between Turner High School and Fenton Middle School. And so there's a lot of dynamics between these middle school kids and the high school kids that them mixing together can cause problems as well, because the high school kids will prey on the younger kids. So what happened? The constable, the police officer, looked at floor plans of the school, crime statistics, interviewed students, administrators, teachers, support staff, and the maintenance staff. If you want to know what's going on in a school, talk to the maintenance personnel. They know students, they know teachers, they know parents, they know everything. And so they're the best resource. So what did he think needed to be done? He looked at the problems with the parking lot design that divided the campus. He saw there was no signage preventing people from coming on campus. We talked about signage as well. There were very few walkways to provide safe travel on campus, and there was no bus loading zone that put kids together. And when a herd of kids come together after school, there's going to be flare-ups. There's going to be problems. There's going to be anarchy at the kid level for anybody trying to organizing or herding the cats, as I would call it. Whoops, sorry. So what did he do? He changed the parking from east-west to north-south. The school did that. They repainted the parking. They raised the walkway in the loading zone, limiting escape and entry routes from 3 to 2. So you could come in one way, you could only leave one way. Didn't have this cluster of cars and cluster of kids. They improved the natural surveillance in the parking lot, put in prohibited signs and required the people visitor parking. They come to the office to get visitor parking if they were coming on campus. Student and faculty required parking passes. They put speed bumps strategically to slow down the cars, the kids' cars. So you see all these things that went together in place to change the environment, which changed the vulnerability of the illegal trespassers on campus, with very few other things. This didn't take police doing a bunch of things. This didn't take parents doing a bunch of things. It was simply a design approach. What was the assessment? Illegal activity dropped significantly. Incidents dropped from 62 to 7 to 9 annually, a 67% drop. And then the next year, dropped to only 3, 97% from the first year. And that's how these things come together. One other thing before we get to questions. This website gives you links to what I call problem-oriented policing guides. These guides talk about how you can apply community policing and problem solving and crime prevention to a host of different crime issues. Everything from internet fraud to burglaries to robberies to school-related crimes to all these things. These are free. To prescription drug abuse, methamphetamine abuse, heroin abuse, all these things, gangs. So if you're interested in these materials, they are also available to you. And Cindy, that's all for me. If you wanted to wrap it up, and I can take questions.
Thank you, Ron. I hope you guys can hear me now. And thank you all for your patience with my technical issues and for joining us today. This grant was provided by grant number 2014-HW-WXK056, awarded by the Office of Community Oriented Policing Services, U.S. Department of Justice. Following the Q&A, you'll be directed to a brief survey and the technical assistance site where you will find the free resources Ron spoke about and also additional free online courses. We ask that you take a minute to kindly complete the survey, as your comments and feedback allow us to accurately report back to the COPS office and improve our webinars. Please note we will email you with a link to view and share the video presentation after this webinar. To conclude, also we appreciate you joining us today for this series. We have 2 additional series or webinars to follow this as part of the series. So make sure that you follow us on Facebook, where we will make the announcements, as well as in the constant contact. So with that, Ron, we've got about 7 minutes left for any Q&A. And if I don't see any, then I will close the webinar. And thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody coming. I know your busy days, and I hope that these things help and the materials help you as well. Any questions at all? Well, Cindy, I think I wore everybody out. Oh,
that was a lot of information to take in over 90 minutes. So,
well, let me also say, if any of you are sitting with a friend, be sure that you get their name to Cindy, because we want to make sure that everybody gets credit for the seminar. Okay. I didn't know if you already said that, Cindy.
I think I did in the very beginning, but my computer was not functioning. So thank you for that reminder. Okay, everyone, then this concludes our webinar today. I will get the information and links sent out to you over the next couple of days. Ron, thank you so much for all of the information, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Cindy, I'm going to call you.